The aircraft had already reached a steady height above the clouds, and everything inside the cabin felt calm and ordinary. Soft engine sounds filled the space like a constant hum, and the lights were dimmed to make the long journey more comfortable for the passengers. People had settled into their seats in different ways. Some leaned back with their eyes closed, trying to rest. Others watched movies on small screens, while a few quietly looked out of the windows at the endless white sky outside. In one of the middle rows, a woman sat quietly in her seat. She wore a simple uniform that did not attract much attention. There was nothing flashy or unusual about her appearance. Her hair was neatly tied back, and she kept her hands folded in her lap most of the time. She looked calm, composed, and slightly tired, as if she had already been through a long day before boarding the flight. Most of the passengers who noticed her only gave her a quick glance before looking away. She did not speak much, and she did not try to interact with anyone. To them, she seemed like just another traveler heading to a different city for work or family reasons. A few even assumed she might be part of a medical staff team traveling between hospitals, but no one asked her directly. In a place like this, people rarely talked to strangers unless it was necessary. The cabin crew moved through the aisles with practiced efficiency. They checked seatbelts, offered water, and made sure everyone was comfortable. Everything followed a routine that had been repeated thousands of times before. There was a peaceful rhythm in the way the flight continued, as if nothing in the world outside could disturb it. The woman in the simple uniform remained quiet, observing everything around her without drawing attention. She occasionally adjusted her seat slightly or looked down at her hands. There was a calmness in her expression, but also something thoughtful, as if her mind was occupied with deeper thoughts. It was not clear what she was thinking about, and no one tried to find out. Some seats away, a group of passengers chatted softly. They spoke about their destinations, their plans after landing, and small everyday things that people often talk about during long flights. A few rows ahead, a young child rested against a window, holding a small toy tightly in their hands. The child's parent gently brushed their hair back, trying to help them sleep. Everything seemed normal, predictable, safe. But sometimes, even in the most peaceful moments, there is a strange feeling that something is waiting just beyond sight. Not obvious, not loud, but present in a quiet way that people cannot explain. It was the kind of calm that could easily be mistaken for complete safety, even though life often changes without warning. The woman adjusted her posture slightly and looked toward the front of the cabin. Her expression remained steady, but her eyes seemed alert in a subtle way. She noticed how the cabin crew communicated with small gestures, how they moved with quiet coordination, and how the passengers remained relaxed. Everything appeared perfectly under control. Still, she did not fully relax in the same way others did. There was a certain awareness in her behavior, as if she was always ready for something unexpected. Not nervous, not anxious, but prepared in a quiet and professional sense. It was not something she showed openly. It was just part of who she was. As the flight continued, the sounds inside the cabin became softer. A few passengers fell asleep completely, their breathing slow and steady. The hum of the aircraft engines created a steady background rhythm that made time feel slower. The world outside the windows remained bright and endless, filled with clouds that stretched far into the distance like a soft white ocean. The woman's thoughts drifted briefly, though no one knew where they went. Perhaps she was thinking about the journey ahead or the place she was traveling to. Perhaps she was simply resting her mind after a long stretch of responsibility. Whatever it was, her expression remained controlled and calm. The cabin crew passed by her seat once more. One of them gave a polite smile, and she responded with a small nod. It was a simple, quiet exchange that lasted only a second. Nothing unusual, nothing worth remembering. Just another moment in a long journey where everything felt routine. A few passengers nearby began to shift in their seats, adjusting blankets or stretching their arms. The air inside the cabin felt slightly cooler now, which made some people pull their jackets closer. The lights remained soft, and the atmosphere stayed peaceful. Yet, even in this calm environment, life has a way of carrying silent unpredictability. No one on board could have guessed that a moment was slowly approaching that would change the meaning of this flight entirely. It was not visible. It did not announce itself. It simply existed, moving closer with each passing minute. The woman glanced out of the window again. The clouds outside looked endless and quiet, like a frozen world suspended in time. For a brief moment, everything felt almost unreal, as if the aircraft was moving through a dream rather than the sky. She took a slow breath and leaned back slightly in her seat. Her posture relaxed just a little, but her awareness never fully faded. There was something about long journeys like this that made people think deeply, sometimes without even realizing it. Across the aisle, another passenger quietly closed their eyes, trying to sleep. A flight attendant passed by once more, checking overhead compartments and ensuring everything was secure. The soft sound of footsteps on the carpeted floor blended into the background. Time moved steadily, almost invisibly. And yet, inside this calm and controlled environment, there was a subtle shift beginning to form. Something so small at first that no one noticed it. Not the passengers, not the crew, and not even those who were usually attentive to every detail. It was just a passing moment, a slight change in the flow of the journey. The woman in the simple uniform did not react outwardly, but something in her awareness sharpened slightly. It was not fear. It was not concern. It was the quiet readiness of someone who had experienced enough of life to understand that calm moments can change without warning. She looked forward again, her expression unchanged, but her attention quietly focused. The cabin remained peaceful, filled with soft light, sleeping passengers, and the steady sound of flight through the sky. And still, beneath all of it, the story of this journey had already begun to move toward something that no one on board was prepared for yet. The calm inside the aircraft continued for a while, just as it had been since takeoff. The soft hum of engines remained steady, and most passengers were either resting or quietly occupied with their own thoughts. Nothing seemed unusual. The woman in the simple uniform still sat in her seat, composed and observant, as she had been earlier. She did not interact with anyone, but her awareness of everything around her remained steady in a quiet, natural way. The flight had reached that middle phase where time often feels slow. People begin to relax more deeply, some even losing track of how long they have been in the air. The cabin lighting stayed soft, and the gentle movement of the aircraft made it easy for many to drift into a light sleep. A few passengers had their heads tilted against the windows, while others leaned back with blankets pulled closer. The woman briefly shifted in her seat again. She looked toward the aisle, watching the movement of the cabin crew as they passed through with calm steps. Everything still appeared normal. But sometimes, even in the most peaceful environments, a single unexpected moment can break the rhythm completely. It started quietly, in a way that no one immediately noticed. A few rows away from the woman, a passenger began to feel slightly uncomfortable. At first, it was not obvious. The person adjusted their position in the seat, as if trying to find a better angle to rest. Many passengers do that during long flights, so no one paid attention at first. Even nearby travelers remained focused on their own activities, unaware that anything was changing. But within a short time, the discomfort did not go away. Instead, it slowly became more noticeable. The passengers' breathing seemed uneven, and their movements became less relaxed. They shifted again, this time more slowly, as if trying to understand what was happening inside their own body. A nearby traveler finally noticed and leaned slightly forward, asking softly if everything was all right. The question was gentle, almost casual, but it carried concern underneath. The passenger tried to respond, but their voice came out weaker than expected. It was enough to raise a small sense of worry in the nearby seats. Within moments, the quiet atmosphere began to change. The passenger's condition seemed to worsen gradually, not suddenly, but in a way that made those nearby more alert. People started to look around, exchanging uncertain glances. Someone pressed the call button above the seat, and the small light turned on, signaling for cabin crew assistance. That single light, glowing softly in the overhead panel, became the first visible sign that something was not right. The cabin crew noticed almost immediately. One of them moved quickly but calmly down the aisle, maintaining the professional composure that is always expected in the air. Another followed shortly after, sensing that extra attention might be needed. Their footsteps were controlled, not rushed, but there was a clear sense of focus in their movement now. The passengers nearby shifted in their seats to make space as the crew approached. The earlier calmness of the cabin had now changed into quiet concern. People were no longer focused on screens or sleep. Instead, they watched carefully, trying to understand what was happening without creating panic. The passenger who was unwell tried to speak again, but the words were unclear and weak. The crew immediately began asking simple questions, checking basic signs and trying to understand the situation. Their voices remained calm, steady, and reassuring, designed to keep the environment from becoming stressful. But it was clear that this was not a small issue that could be ignored. One of the cabin crew members gently asked if there was any medical professional on board. The question was made through the aircraft's announcement system, and it spread across the cabin in a calm but serious tone. The words reached every corner of the aircraft, breaking through the soft background noise of engines and movement. "Is there any medical professional on board?" For a moment there was silence. Passengers looked at each other. Some sat still, unsure whether to respond or not. Others glanced around, hoping someone would step forward. The woman in the simple uniform heard the announcement clearly, but she did not move immediately. Her expression remained steady, but her attention sharpened slightly. The silence continued for a few seconds that felt longer than they actually were. Then, slowly, the cabin began to shift again. People exchanged quiet looks. A few leaned forward in their seats, scanning the rows. The sense of concern grew slightly stronger as the situation remained unresolved. The crew repeated the request in a calm tone, this time with a bit more urgency. The seriousness was still controlled, but now it was more noticeable. The passenger in need was being attended to, but it was clear that additional expertise might be necessary. At that moment, several passengers held their breath without realizing it. The aircraft felt quieter than before, as if the entire cabin was waiting for a response. The woman finally moved. She did not stand suddenly or draw attention in a dramatic way. Instead, she calmly unbuckled her seatbelt and rose with quiet confidence. Her movement was steady, not rushed, but purposeful. She stepped into the aisle, and for the first time since the beginning of the flight, several passengers noticed her more clearly. First, some of them looked confused. She had been sitting quietly for most of the journey, and nothing about her appearance suggested anything unusual. But now she was walking forward, toward the source of the announcement. The cabin crew noticed her immediately and stepped slightly aside to allow her to approach. There was a brief exchange of eye contact, a silent understanding that something had changed in the situation. She spoke softly, offering simple words that confirmed she had medical training. Her voice was calm and controlled, carrying no panic or hesitation. The crew responded quickly, guiding her toward the passenger who needed help. As she moved down the aisle, the atmosphere inside the cabin changed again. Passengers followed her with their eyes. Some looked relieved that someone had stepped forward. Others remained tense, still unsure of what was happening. The woman walked with steady steps, her focus now entirely on the situation ahead. She was no longer just another passenger. In that moment, her presence carried a different weight. As she reached the seat where the passenger was seated, she paused briefly, taking in the situation with careful observation. The surrounding passengers shifted slightly to give her space. The cabin crew stood nearby, ready to assist but allowing her to take the lead. The unwell passenger looked weak and disoriented, barely able to sit upright comfortably. The woman's expression remained composed, but her attention was fully locked onto the condition in front of her. She gently asked a few simple questions, her tone calm and reassuring. Even in a tense moment, her voice seemed to bring a small sense of stability to those nearby. The passenger tried to respond, and although the answers were not strong, they gave her enough information to begin understanding the situation. Around them, the cabin had become completely quiet. No one was talking anymore. Even the usual background sounds of movement had reduced. People were watching carefully, holding on to every small detail, hoping things would improve. The woman adjusted her position slightly, preparing to assess further. Her movements were careful and controlled, showing experience and confidence without needing to say much. The cabin crew stood ready with supplies, watching her closely. It was clear now that something important was unfolding inside the aircraft. A routine flight had shifted into a situation that required attention, coordination, and calm decision-making. And in the middle of it all, the woman who had once been just another quiet passenger had now become the center of focus. But no one yet fully understood how capable she truly was, or what would happen in the moments that were about to follow. The cabin had become completely different from how it was just a short time ago. What was once a peaceful and quiet flight now carried a heavy sense of concern that no one could ignore. Passengers who had been resting or quietly enjoying their journey were now fully awake, watching every movement with focused attention. The soft hum of the aircraft still continued in the background, but it felt less comforting than before. It now sounded like a reminder that they were far above the ground, with limited help available if something serious happened. Near the middle section of the cabin, the passenger who had fallen unwell was still being attended to. The woman in the simple uniform stood close, carefully observing every detail. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes showed deep focus. She was not rushed, yet she was fully engaged in understanding what was happening. The cabin crew stood nearby, ready to assist at any moment, but giving her the space she needed to work. The surrounding passengers stayed silent. Some leaned slightly forward in their seats, trying to see better without disturbing anything. Others simply watched with worried expressions, hoping silently that the situation would improve soon. The usual comfort of flight travel had disappeared, replaced by a shared sense of concern that connected everyone in the cabin. The woman asked a few more gentle questions. Her voice remained steady and calm, helping to keep the environment from becoming more stressful. The passenger tried to respond again, but the answers were still weak and unclear. She listened carefully, not showing any panic, only steady concentration. Every small detail mattered to her in that moment. She checked again, observing breathing patterns, posture, and responsiveness. Her movements were careful and professional, showing experience that went beyond what most passengers had expected from someone sitting quietly just minutes ago. The cabin crew handed her what she needed without delay, trusting her judgment. But even as she continued her assessment, something more urgent was unfolding elsewhere in the cabin. A few rows away, one of the crew members had already communicated with the cockpit. The situation had been reported, and a decision was being prepared at the higher level. The aircraft's communication system was now active, and the seriousness of the situation was being carefully evaluated. Everything remained controlled, but there was a growing sense that additional support might be necessary. Inside the cabin, passengers could feel this shift even without hearing every detail. The body language of the crew, the quiet coordination between them, and the focused attention around the passenger all suggested that this was no longer a simple discomfort. It was something that required immediate care and careful handling. Then, after a short but tense moment, the announcement came. It started with a brief pause, as if the entire cabin was holding its breath. Even those who had been whispering or moving slightly became still. The sound system clicked softly, and then the voice of the cabin crew filled the space. It was calm but serious. "Is there any medical professional on board? We need medical help now." Those words spread through the cabin like a wave. For a second, there was no reaction. It was as if everyone needed a moment to fully understand what they had just heard. The phrase was simple, but it carried weight. The words "we need medical help now" changed the atmosphere instantly. People looked at each other with concern, and some instinctively turned their heads in different directions, searching for a response. The cabin, which had already been quiet, became even more silent. A few passengers tightened their grip on their armrests. Others leaned forward slightly, their eyes fixed toward the middle of the aircraft where everything was happening. A child who had been resting earlier opened their eyes and looked around, sensing the change in energy even without understanding it fully. The woman in the simple uniform heard the announcement clearly. She paused for a brief moment, her eyes shifting slightly as she processed the situation. There was no dramatic reaction, no visible surprise, just a quiet internal focus. She looked once more at the passenger in front of her, then toward the cabin crew. Something in her expression changed subtly, like a decision being made. Without hesitation, she slowly stepped back from her seat position and adjusted her stance. The movement was calm and controlled, but it carried purpose. She was no longer simply observing. She was preparing to take full responsibility for what needed to be done. One of the cabin crew members noticed immediately and gave a quick nod. There was no need for long explanation anymore. The situation was clear. The woman had already shown her understanding and capability, and now time was becoming more important. As she moved slightly into a better position, passengers around her watched closely. Some had not fully realized her role until this moment. To them, she had just been another quiet traveler. But now her presence felt different. There was confidence in her posture and calmness in her expression that drew attention without effort. She spoke again briefly, asking for a few more details in a steady voice. The crew responded quickly, providing what they knew. The cabin around them remained completely silent, as if the entire aircraft had paused just to observe this single moment. The passenger in need was still seated, showing signs of discomfort and weakness, but the woman continued her careful assessment. She focused entirely on the situation, blocking out distractions. Her hands moved with precision as she checked again, adjusting her approach based on what she observed. Every movement she made seemed deliberate, not rushed, but efficient. There was a sense that she had handled situations like this before, even if no one knew her background. Her calmness helped stabilize the environment, preventing panic from spreading among those nearby. The cabin crew stood close, ready to assist but clearly relying on her direction. Their trust in her was becoming more visible with each passing second. They followed her instructions without delay, passing items and making space as needed. Around them, passengers continued to watch in silence. Some had their hands clasped together, others simply stared, trying to understand how quickly the situation had changed from normal to serious. The atmosphere felt heavy, but also strangely focused. Everyone was connected by the same concern. The woman leaned slightly closer to the passenger again, speaking in a calm and reassuring tone. Even though the situation was serious, her voice carried a sense of control that helped reduce fear. The passenger responded faintly, and she listened carefully, absorbing every detail. At one point, she paused for a brief moment, thinking through what she had observed. Her expression remained composed, but her eyes showed deep concentration. It was clear she was forming a plan of action based on her assessment. The cabin felt frozen in time. Even the movement of air and small sounds of the aircraft seemed distant. All attention was focused on this one area. Then, without any sign of panic, she gave a quiet instruction to the cabin crew. They immediately followed, moving efficiently and bringing what was needed. Her leadership in the moment was subtle but clear. She did not need to raise her voice or demand attention. Her calm confidence guided the situation naturally. Passengers nearby began to realize something important. The woman was not just helping. She was taking control of the situation in a way that brought structure to the uncertainty. Her presence created order where there had been confusion. The announcement still echoed in people's minds. We need medical help now. But now that urgency had a direction. There was someone actively responding, someone who understood what to do. As she continued working, her focus remained unbroken. Time around her felt different, as if everything else had slowed down. Each second mattered, and she treated every detail with care. The cabin crew observed closely, ready to support her every step. Passengers stayed silent, their attention fixed on the unfolding scene. No one spoke. No one moved unnecessarily. It was as if the entire aircraft had become one shared moment of waiting and hope. And in the middle of it all, the woman in the simple uniform continued her careful work, still holding back much of what no one yet knew about her, while the situation inside the cabin moved toward something that would soon change everything for everyone on board. The cabin remained in a state of deep silence, but it was no longer the calm silence of a peaceful flight. It was the kind of silence that comes when everyone is waiting, watching, and hoping at the same time. Passengers barely moved in their seats. Even the usual small sounds of shifting bags, adjusting seatbelts, or whispering conversations had disappeared. It felt as if the entire aircraft had narrowed its attention to one single point in the middle of the cabin. The woman in the simple uniform stood close to the passenger who needed help. Her posture was steady, and her focus was absolute. She was no longer just observing or assessing. Now she was actively responding, making careful decisions based on what she saw and heard. Her calmness had not changed since the beginning, but now it carried even more weight. It was the kind of calm that made others feel slightly more secure, even in an uncertain situation. The cabin crew stood nearby, fully attentive. They had shifted from general assistance to following her lead step by step. Their movements were quiet and efficient, handing her what she needed without delay. The trust they showed was not spoken, but it was clear in the way they responded quickly and without hesitation. The passenger on the seat appeared weak and disoriented. Breathing was irregular, and responses were slow. The woman carefully adjusted her position to make sure she could observe more closely. She spoke softly, asking simple questions, keeping her tone gentle and steady. Even in a stressful moment, her voice helped maintain a sense of control around her. Passengers in the surrounding rows watched closely. Some leaned slightly into the aisle, trying to see better without interfering. Others remained frozen in place, their hands resting tightly on armrests or folded in their laps. A few looked away at times, overwhelmed by the tension, but their attention always returned to the center of the cabin. The woman began to act more decisively now. She gave short, clear instructions to the crew. Each instruction was simple, but it showed that she understood exactly what needed to be done. The crew responded immediately, bringing items, adjusting space, and helping to ensure everything remained organized. There was no panic in her actions. Everything she did was controlled, measured, and focused. Even those who did not understand medical details could sense that she knew what she was doing. Her confidence was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and deeply reassuring. At one point, she gently adjusted the passenger's position to make breathing easier. The movement was careful and respectful, showing both skill and concern. The cabin crew assisted, following her guidance closely. The surrounding passengers held their breath as they watched, hoping for improvement in even the smallest sign. For a brief moment, the passenger showed slight responsiveness. It was not strong, but it was enough to create a ripple of relief among those watching. The woman noticed it immediately and continued her calm approach, building on that small sign. She remained focused, not allowing herself to be distracted by the emotions in the cabin. But while she worked, something else was happening in the background of the aircraft. The cockpit had been informed in detail, and the flight crew was now coordinating with ground support. The situation was being carefully evaluated from above and below. Every decision was being considered with caution. The aircraft was still in the air, but preparations were being made in case further assistance would be needed upon landing. The passengers, of course, were not aware of all the technical details, but they could sense the seriousness in the atmosphere. The calm of the flight had completely changed. Even those who had been asleep earlier were now awake, quietly observing, trying to understand how things had shifted so quickly. The woman continued her careful attention, occasionally pausing to reassess. Each pause was brief, but important. She was constantly adjusting her understanding based on how the situation evolved. The cabin around her remained still, as if afraid to interrupt even a single moment of concentration. A flight attendant stood slightly behind her, watching closely. The expression on the attendant's face was serious, but also hopeful. There was trust now in the woman's presence, trust that had grown rapidly in a short amount of time. What had started as uncertainty had slowly turned into reliance. The passenger's condition still required attention, and the woman did not step away. She remained close, speaking softly from time to time, ensuring that the person remained as stable as possible. Her focus never drifted, not even for a second. Passengers nearby began to notice something important. Even though the situation was serious, there was no panic spreading through the cabin. The reason was simple. The presence of someone calm and capable in the center of the situation was helping to hold everything together. Without needing to say much, the woman was preventing fear from growing out of control. Still, the tension remained. Every small sound, every movement from the crew, every change in expression was being watched carefully. People were hoping for improvement, but also preparing themselves emotionally for uncertainty. It was a strange mixture of hope and anxiety that filled the cabin. The woman took a slow breath and continued her careful observation. She checked again, adjusting her approach based on what she saw. Her movements were precise, but gentle. She was clearly experienced in managing situations that required both technical understanding and emotional control. The cabin crew followed her guidance without delay. One of them quietly handed her another item she requested. Another made space around the seat to ensure she could work without obstruction. Everything was coordinated smoothly, almost silently, as if everyone had adapted to her rhythm. A few passengers exchanged quiet glances. They could see the difference in the cabin now compared to just minutes earlier. There was still concern, but there was also structure. There was still fear, but there was also direction. That shift had come from the woman who had stepped forward without hesitation. The aircraft itself continued its steady path through the sky. Outside the windows, clouds stretched endlessly, calm and unchanged. Inside, however, everything had transformed. Time felt slower, and every second felt meaningful. The woman briefly looked up toward the crew, giving a calm nod. It was a simple gesture, but it carried understanding. The crew responded immediately, continuing to support her efforts. The coordination between them was quiet but strong. The passenger showed another small sign of awareness. It was not dramatic, but it was noticeable enough for those nearby to feel a small wave of relief again. The woman acknowledged it without overreacting. She stayed focused, continuing her careful approach step by step. Around them, the cabin remained silent, but the emotional weight had shifted slightly. Hope was still fragile, but it was present. People were still worried, but they were also beginning to believe that something could improve. The woman did not speak much. She did not need to. Her actions carried more meaning than words. Every movement, every instruction, every moment of attention showed control and responsibility. And yet, even as she worked with full focus, there was still something about her that remained unknown to everyone watching. Passengers saw her as calm and capable, but they did not yet understand the full depth of her experience or the path that had brought her to this moment. The situation was still unfolding, and the most critical moments were not over yet. The cabin remained in suspense, holding on to every sign of progress, while the woman in the simple uniform continued her quiet, steady efforts in the center of it all, carrying the weight of the moment with a calmness that few people around her could fully understand. The cabin remained unusually quiet, but the silence now felt different from before. Earlier, it had been filled with uncertainty and worry. Now it carried something softer, something closer to hope. Passengers were still watching closely, still holding their breath at times, but there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. It was not fully calm yet, but it was no longer chaos either. It was a fragile balance between concern and relief. The woman in the simple uniform continued her careful work beside the passenger. Her focus had not changed from the very beginning. She remained steady, observant, and calm in every movement. Her presence had become the center of attention in the cabin, even though she never asked for it. People looked at her not with confusion anymore, but with trust. The cabin crew stayed close, following her instructions exactly as given. Their coordination had become smooth and natural, as if they had worked together for a long time. Every item she requested was provided quickly. Every adjustment she suggested was done without delay. The quiet teamwork between them helped keep the situation stable. The passenger who had been unwell showed small but meaningful signs of improvement. It was not sudden or dramatic, but noticeable enough for those watching. Breathing became slightly more even. Movements were less strained. The woman noticed every detail immediately, adjusting her approach gently to support continued stability. She spoke softly again, her voice calm and reassuring. The passenger responded faintly, but this time with a little more clarity than before. That small change brought visible relief to the nearby crew members. Even the passengers in surrounding seats seemed to relax just a little, though they were still tense and alert. The woman did not rush. She knew that recovery in such moments was gradual. Her attention remained fixed, carefully monitoring each small change. She checked again, ensured comfort, and made sure everything around the passenger remained stable. Her actions were precise but gentle, showing both skill and deep care. In the background, the cockpit had already been informed that the situation was improving. Communication with ground support continued, but now the tone had shifted from urgent preparation to cautious monitoring. The aircraft was still in flight, but the tension that had filled the earlier moments was slowly easing. Inside the cabin, passengers began to notice this change. Some who had been leaning forward now sat back slightly. A few who had clasped their hands tightly began to relax their grip. The emotional pressure that had filled the space was slowly lifting, replaced by quiet relief. Still, no one spoke loudly. The memory of what had just happened was still fresh. Everyone understood how quickly things had changed earlier, and no one wanted to disturb the fragile stability that had returned. The woman continued to observe carefully. She adjusted her position slightly, maintaining close awareness of the passenger. Her expression remained composed, but there was now a subtle sense of reassurance in her eyes. She was still fully focused, but the immediate danger seemed to have passed. After a few more moments, the passenger responded again, this time more clearly. It was still weak, but it was a definite improvement. The surrounding crew exchanged brief glances, silently acknowledging the progress. One of them gave a small nod, a quiet sign of relief that did not need words. The woman gently continued her support, ensuring the passenger remained stable. She guided the cabin crew through a few more simple steps, each one aimed at maintaining comfort and safety. Everything was done calmly, without urgency now, but with continued care. The cabin slowly began to feel less tense. Passengers started to breathe more normally. Some even looked out of the windows again, as if reconnecting with the outside world after a long moment of emotional focus. The aircraft still hummed steadily, but now it felt less heavy. Time seemed to move forward again. The woman finally took a small step back, not leaving completely, but giving a little space while still observing closely. Her role had shifted from immediate action to careful monitoring. She remained alert, but the most critical moment appeared to be passing. The cabin crew thanked her quietly, their expressions showing both respect and relief. She responded with a simple nod, not drawing attention to herself. For her, the focus was never on recognition. It was on ensuring the situation was handled properly. Passengers nearby watched this exchange closely. Some had not fully understood earlier how important her actions were, but now it was becoming clear. The calm way she had taken control, the way she had guided everything without panic, had changed the outcome of the situation inside the cabin. A few passengers exchanged quiet words with each other, expressing relief and disbelief at how quickly things had improved. Others remained silent, still processing everything that had happened in such a short time. The woman returned to a steady standing position near the seat, continuing to observe the passenger carefully. Even though the immediate crisis had eased, she did not fully step away. Her responsibility in the moment was not over yet. The passenger's condition continued to stabilize slowly. The changes were small but steady. The woman acknowledged each improvement without overreacting. She maintained a calm presence, ensuring nothing was overlooked. The cabin crew made a quiet announcement over the internal system, informing the cockpit that the situation was now under control and stable. That message brought visible relief to those who understood its meaning. It confirmed that the most serious part of the situation had passed. Inside the cabin, the emotional energy shifted again. This time, it moved from tension to relief. It was not loud or expressive, but it was deeply felt. Passengers who had been worried for several minutes now began to relax more fully. The woman finally stepped back slightly more, allowing the crew to take over ongoing observation. She remained nearby, still attentive, but no longer actively intervening. Her role in the immediate emergency had been completed with quiet effectiveness. For the first time since the announcement, she looked around the cabin briefly. Her expression remained calm, but there was a subtle softness in it now. The intensity of the moment had passed, but the awareness remained. Some passengers looked at her differently now. Earlier, she had been just another quiet traveler. Then she had become the center of urgent attention. Now she had become something else entirely in their eyes. Someone capable, composed, and quietly remarkable. A child a few seats away looked toward her with curiosity, as if sensing that something important had just taken place. A few passengers nodded gently in her direction, silent gestures of appreciation that did not require words. The woman gave no reaction to the attention. She simply returned to her quiet composure, as if the situation had always been under control and nothing unusual had happened. But those who had watched closely knew otherwise. The cabin slowly returned to a more normal state. People adjusted their seats again. A few resumed quiet conversations. Some leaned back and closed their eyes, trying to relax after the emotional tension. The aircraft continued its journey smoothly through the sky. Still, there was a sense that something had changed permanently inside this flight. It was not just about the passenger who had been helped. It was about the experience everyone had shared in those intense moments. A moment where fear had appeared, but calm action had taken its place. The woman remained seated near the aisle, still observant, still composed. But now the urgency was gone. What remained was quiet stability. And yet, for many passengers, the memory of what she had done would stay with them long after the flight ended. They would remember how quickly she had stepped forward, how calmly she had taken control, and how her presence had changed the outcome of a situation that had once felt uncertain. The aircraft continued forward, steady and smooth, carrying everyone closer to their destination. Inside, life slowly returned to normal, but not without a lasting impression. Because for everyone on board, this was no longer just another flight. It had become a moment they would remember. A moment shaped quietly by a woman they had once thought was just an ordinary passenger.